Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Intersectionality in the Workplace digital event, hosted by the CMI London Board. My name is Mel, and I'm an event delivery coordinator at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Joe to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded, and it will be shared later on today for those who have booked to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and CMI YouTube channel. Now over to Joe Dalal, volunteer at the CMI London Board, to begin.
Thanks very much, Mel. Thanks. My name's Jo Dalal. I'm a long-term member of the CMI, but working mainly in higher education. And it was there that I met Dr. Melissa Jogi at Roehampton University, where she inspires both students and her colleagues. And I know that she's going to do that during her talk with us today on understanding complexity in the workplace. Melissa is a senior researcher at the University of Roehampton in London. And just speaking to her, even for a few minutes, you can feel her passion, her understanding, her enthusiasm with all the areas that she touches on, which is quite extensive. She currently leads on 8 externally funded research grants, which is quite a large number. These include advocacy projects, investigating educational support for women who are survivors of domestic violence, and working with a homeless charity to transform their operations into a business hub. She is now also director of Advance HE's Diversifying Leadership Program, which is their flagship course, helping to generate and stimulate leadership mindsets of Black and minority ethnic staff from professional and academic roles across the UK and higher education. Before migrating to the UK in 2016, not so very many years ago, and she seems to have done so much in the meantime, she lived and worked in Australia, where she was a corporate communication manager reporting to the CEO of NATI, which is Australia's accreditation gatekeeper for interpreters and translators. She also served as a project management for Australian Capital Territory in Canberra, delivering strategies to help youth transition out of secondary schools into further education. And this culminated in the Chief Minister's Award for Excellence in 2013. I could go on forever about Melissa, but I know I've got to stop here because you really are going to enjoy and learn an awful lot from her session today. So over to you, Melissa.
Oh, thank you very much, Joe. And thank you very much for joining today. I really appreciate the offer from CMI and the organization, Joe and Mel and the team. So it's a real pleasure to be here. And I do hope I can live up to those expectations that Joe has so cleverly set out. So I will begin. Let's just find that. Sorry, just a second. There we go. Minor delays here, so I hope that you can now see my screen. So today's talk is focusing on intersectionality in the workplace. And I'm very much aware that I'm speaking to an audience, a very wide audience of professional leaders and people who work across a range of sectors. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to try and capture some key points that may be pertinent to the role that you play or the job that you do within your organization. And hopefully this discussion of intersectionality can help advance some of your thoughts, your thinking, and your leadership skills. So out of the session, I know it's maybe lunchtime for many of you, so what is the takeaway? We're going to start talking a little bit about how your rights are protected in the workplace, and touch on the fact that we all aspire to have equality, but not all equality is equal. So what do I mean about that? what is intersectionality and how does it affect you? We may have heard the term buzzing around, but does this really apply to you? Are you part of this discussion, or is it something that is otherized out of the remit of what you do? And how to better your leadership skills with intersectionality in mind. Is this concept something that you should be wary of, or you should take into consideration when making decisions? So without further ado, I'm going to poll to find out a little bit more from you, the audience, how much you know about intersectionality. There should be a poll ticker across your screen telling you how to participate. And I just might ask Mel if she can share the poll with you now. So as you're filling in those options, the term intersectionality is something that we are working in the sector to try and define. In higher education, for those of you who are maybe part of that higher education institution, we have something called the Race Equality Charter that is run by the Advance HE, which is trying to advocate now more presently for intersectional issues that may occur in the workplace. And I can see from the poll that the term and the meaning of intersectionality is sort of wavering between extremely and not very familiar. And it's okay in these audiences to be really blatantly honest, because I can't see you, unfortunately, but you can really share what you know, and I will adapt as we move forward with what you're saying in mind. Never heard of it. Yeah, okay. Okay, so not very familiar. A lot of people are not very familiar. So you are in the right place to get some insight on what does intersectionality mean. I find it very helpful to ask the audience these questions because I went to a workshop not too long ago where we were talking about decolonizing, and a lot of our professional services staff in higher education did not know what is this agenda, and this sprung to mind today that you're busy with your day-to-day job. What is intersectionality? So, okay, so I'm going to take it that about 49% are not very familiar. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. So we'll just resume the presentation. And I'll start with talking about your rights. So the Equality Act in 2010, that came out in 2010, makes it law that every private, public, and voluntary organization must not discriminate against employees and the people who use your services because of particular characteristics of their nature or who they are. The Equality Act is the utmost umbrella, and for many of you who may be working in human resources will know that the law determines a lot of the policies and a lot of the procedures that are implemented into workplaces for us to abide by. The Equality Act is the grand act that protects us from discrimination. So in 2010, I believe it came under the auspice of the Labour Party. But before 2010, the Equality Act existed through various forms of rights. From 1970 onwards, we had these documents of rights that were basically assembled into their own nugget. And you had equal pay rights, you had employment equality for your sexual orientation, the Race Relations Act. So these rights were distributed several different pockets, and it would be part of the task to put this together and to know which law you had to go to in order to figure out were you being discriminated against. So you necessarily, absolutely need a lawyer to try and navigate your way around your rights. So part of the putting together of the Equality Act in 2010 was to simplify this process and to put the rights in one compositional package that helped us identify how these rights of that you could be protected from of discrimination, that you weren't being discriminated against across all of the variety characteristics that made up who you are and the services that you provide in your workplace. So discrimination, according to the Act, is treating people unfairly because of who they are or because they possess certain characteristics. Under discrimination is also victimization. And it's when someone treats you badly or subjects you or targets you because you complain about discrimination for yourself or for someone else. It also includes harassment, which is the unwanted behavior that you may find offensive, that makes you feel humiliated or intimidated. Intersectionality, though, for the purposes of our conversation, looks more at discrimination and victimization than it does pick up on the harassment points in the act itself. So part of the agenda in collapsing all of these different laws and acts is to bring together what are the protected characteristics that we are trying to advocate for and represent. And you can see that these are the characteristics included. You will notice that mental health is not segregated as a separate characteristic. Why is this the case? Well, mental health falls under disability, where you need to prove that your mental health condition is in some way a disability for you. So if you're bipolar or you suffer from depression, your rights are represented in the workplace in the sense that you will not lose your job on the basis of this disability, and that you will be included for and not discriminated against because of it. So it's easier now through the Equality Act to see what those protected characteristics are. And in addition to that, it's easier to also summarize in this Equality Act fact sheet what the Equality Act represents and what those rights are that you are being protected, that is being protected, sorry. And you would find that there are different documents that translate these rights into more accessible forms. So there are some versions of the Equality Act that are disseminated that really focus on making the words simpler and the language much more relatable so that you as an individual can understand and relate to what your rights are. Within the Equality Act fact sheet here, there's this little section. What are public sector equality duties? And within that is highlighted the equality of opportunity. Now, this had me thinking. Equality is one of those words, as I said earlier, that we really aspire to. We champion. We want equality in our society. But it does raise the question of equality of what? And this goes back to Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winner for economics, who delivered a lecture, I think it was the Tanner lecture, on equality of what? And within that lecture, tried to break down what is equality, what is the equality that we are necessarily trying to seek out. And within the Act, we talk about the equality of opportunity. But let's take a step back from that now and try and come to terms with what equality means to us. With the Black Lives Matter movement, you may have come across many statements in the media where people talk about, well, I think that all lives matter and all lives matter. Okay, yes, absolutely. What do you mean by that? Well, we should care exactly equally at all times about everything. Can we do that? We can aspire to do that. But in the quest for equality, are we in some way disadvantaging or putting other needs that we may need to uphold as also equal measures as a significant disadvantage? And by that, we look at, well, all houses matter. So all houses need to be attended to regardless of those that may be set on fire or need to be addressed differently because of the set of circumstances in which it is currently experiencing, or in this case, the house on fire has to wait its turn. So when we collapse statements into all lives matter, or that we need to we need to think equally about everything at all times, we are essentially collapsing the various inequalities that come to the table in any given consideration for a discussion or a decision that needs to be made. And this is where equality and equity, that discussion gets a little bit tricky. So when we talk about the equality of what, some of my work in my forthcoming book looks at mapping the political orientations of equality. And what I mean by that is I'm going to show you quite a complex diagram here, maybe too complex for so early in the day, but I have devised the 4 equalities, or the 4 O's of equality that I like to call it, that sit within the realm of these political orientations. And I want you to think of these orientations as the concepts that underpin the manifestos that political parties would write. You'd see a series of arrows that pull back and forth, because you need to think, and I think you can see my hand here, of the orientations as pulling with different emphasis at all times. They're not fixed in the sense that they're fluid, they do move back and forth. And depending on your political stance, you too will move back and forth depending on the decisions that you are seeing political parties make, or movements that are coming forward. So you do tend to move back and forth, and these are the risks of moving back and forth, how you would potentially go from one form of equality into another. So what's an easy way to break down what are these 4 forms of equality that I'm talking about, and how does that equality differ? So I devised something called the Equality of What Monopoly Edition to help talk you through how these equality forms are differentiated. So imagine you're playing a game of Monopoly with a child, with a policewoman, a gambler, Derrida, who is a philosopher, and yourself. So each of you sit down to play this game, and each one of them are going to represent a different form of equality, or be playing with the agenda to get to a different form of equality. So what do the rules look like for each of them? Well, for the obligation, it's more of the conservative agenda. Everyone plays the game exactly as it has been written in the rules. So the conservatives would advocate that. The rules are set, we're going to play the game exactly as it is. Equality of opportunity would be the liberalist version, where the house rules, so when it comes to purchasing those houses and those swapping out your number of houses for your hotel or whatnot, you would actually change the games of the rules to help your player get to their maximum potential. So you will adapt it to try and get the best out of the circumstance, to get that equality of opportunity. Equality of outcome is where the players play the game, but they try to give the weakest player, in this case I put the child, an opportunity to catch up. So everyone gets to the end of the game, and you try and lessen the rules a bit, or relax it so that others can catch up to where everyone else is on the average. So equality of outcome, you can be championing for that type of equality. Or the equality of origin. So post-structuralists like Derrida might sit and argue about where is the starting point. We know Monopoly starts at the 200 start post to go, but they may say, well, is that really a good starting point for everyone? What does the equality of origination do? Well, they go, let's not play the game at all. So because they can't actually justify going all the way back where this origination point is. So if we look at it in terms of business or in terms of industry, you would find that opportunity and obligation sit more towards the conservative values for access, and obligation will champion more issues for meritocracy, whereas the progressive values will look more at the outcome, trying to get equal pay for genders. Or origination, our sexual orientation with the LGBTQIA2S plus. All right. So you would find that they would be advocating, well, where was our starting point to have a sense of equality to begin with? So these are how the orientations and different rights can be represented by different equalities of what people want in the workplace. So at this point in time, you may be thinking, gosh, it's really hard to get to when we do say the word equality. Maybe in our organizations, we're not all necessarily talking about the same version of equality or want the same outcomes from equality. So just as how we had the comic strip where you can want equality, but you are in a sense collapsing the rights of some people or others to get to a version of equality that you seem fit or deem as most important, it may be at the cost of squeezing on other rights. So this brings us quite nicely into intersectionality and considering, well, what does intersectionality mean in this remit? So I'm going to ask you to complete this poll as well. It's the two beggar scenario. So I want you to imagine that there are two beggars, one in a crowded city and the other in a quiet countryside. So over the course of a day, which beggar do you believe gets more support? Okay, we've got 50-50, beggar in the city, beggar in the countryside. There we go. So right now, most people are thinking the beggar in the city will get more support from a day's takings. Beggar in the countryside, less so. Just wait a little bit longer. And there's the ticker underneath. If you've not signed in yet to put your views, you can at poleaf.com. All right, so, oh, okay, dead set 50-50. We're at a tie here. 49%, 50. Okay, so I'd say right now we are about half the room here is thinking beggar in the city, and about half the room is going beggar in the countryside. Okay, so if let's just that 49-51 difference, call it a little bit of a tie. All right, so let me just get back into the discussion here. Sorry, this is just having a little issue with my PowerPoint. And some of us are still voting, so we are getting to the point of thinking that the beggar in the countryside is winning out. Sorry, 1 second, just a slight technical issue with the PowerPoint. But I do promise this is the last time that we have to dip in and out of the slides. All right, so it's a shame that I'm not able to actually have a discussion with you about which your rationale for which choice you made. So some of you may be thinking, well, the beggar in the city, and maybe alerted to game theory and have decided that you know what you're talking about looking at the odds. But some of you may be thinking the beggar in the countryside because maybe they would know more people or there would be a more interpersonal experience. So in reality, the beggar in the city might most likely get less support. And the reason for this is because of the individuals in a crowded city are all thinking that because they can see so many people around in the city, that the beggar someone else is going to give the beggar support, so they don't have to think about it. An individual does not need to think about the other individuals because they're all thinking, oh, well, somebody will help the beggar out. It doesn't necessarily need to be my concern. I don't need to have a reactive response or think this situation is something that I necessarily need to engage with. So the beggar in the city is likely to get less support just from the influx of more people being around. When we think about Black women, and now we're getting into the heart of intersectionality, building off of that concept, all right? There are policies in our workplaces that attend to Black people, okay, because of the history of and the race relations and the fact that the race discrimination is part of the act, okay? But we also have policies that attend to women. And Kimberly Crenshaw, for those of you who may not know, is the woman who's responsible back in 1989 for coining the term intersectionality. And it came out of a legal premise where she had a woman who came to her, a Black woman, okay, and said, I want to work in this particular workplace, but I'm being discriminated. It was like a mechanic shop or something, because I'm a Black woman. So I'm not a Black man. I can't necessarily be employed as a Black man because it involves working with engines, and the physical tasks of the job are not suited to me, the Black woman. But also, I'm not really fit to be a female employee. I don't fit under the female policies as well, because those females are front-facing staff who answer the phones and are the face of the company, and they are white women. This is what the society at the time feels more comfortable having, a white woman who answers their calls. So even though I'm female, I don't really meet that criteria either. This Black woman essentially wanted to have a job, but neither of these policies would attend to her needs, her particular needs. So the law showed that there was a gap. And this is what intersectionality does. It highlights the gaps where the existing policies don't attend to the unique characteristics of someone who may be slightly needing to belong in both groups. There is no space here for the Black woman. Now, it is at this point that a lot of people will say, okay, this is like double oppression, and the Black woman is doubly oppressed. And they stop the intersectionality discussion at that point, going, okay, there are some people with unique characteristics. That means they are neither fully accounted for in either group. I want to challenge that, because we need to understand, we need to go a little bit beyond that into greater depth of understanding intersectionality to get to the why is this the case, or how are further problems perpetuated from this current condition. So Kimberly Crenshaw did this wonderful TED Talk, and I looked at it in preparation for this talk today. And I highly, really encourage you to look at this TED Talk. Crenshaw is a lawyer, and she's an anti-racist, and she's an activist. So her concept of intersectionality has grown into looking at the representation of white women who are victims, not white women, Black women who are victims of police brutality. And she looks at how those names and the fact that people don't know, it's called her Say Her Name campaign. People don't know the names of these Black women who die, as they would the Black men who die from police brutality. So her talk is largely about creating a frame and identifying that there is a space here that's being overlooked. And the intersectional issues that she raises is that there is violence and there is women. And there are Black women, all right, who are victims of violence, police brutality, not accounted for. So the intersectionality that she tries to advocate does touch back on that issue of the double oppression. But we do find that, well, in the workplace, coming back to the needs of what we are addressing today, how does this create a problem? So back to that, pardon me, graph that I showed you, there is the concept of neglect. So when, just like the beggar scenario, assuming that there is a policy to attend to being Black and there's a policy to attend to being a woman, means that you are considered covered for, when in fact there may be that those characteristics that are unique to you that are not covered for. So that becomes a very insulating problem if you are a Black woman. I'm using the example of the Black woman to continue, but intersectionality does occur over all of those characteristics, and I'll touch on that a little bit towards the end of the talk. So neglect is one of the problems. And this is something we need to attend to in the workplace. When people feel like they don't necessarily belong to one space or another, or are not thought of or considered for, that small form of neglect is that gap of intersectionality that is occurring. Aggravation is the second one. So you have the risk of marginalization and discrimination happening. So if the Black woman goes into the group that attends to Black issues, you may find that she has to compete against Black men. And there may be discrimination happening from men within that group because you're a woman, okay? Likewise, when the woman goes to the issues for women, you would find, or the agendas that attend, the policies that attend to women's needs, there may be aggravations happening and microaggressions happening from white women versus Black women. All right. So then there is the risk of the woman feeling the neglect, but also getting the aggravation of trying to be in a space that is not completely attended to them. This is something as well that is not spoken a lot about when we talk about intersectionality. We do know that we come from, in particular in the UK, a society of talking about white men and the presence of white men designing policies, white men being the absolute head of power, okay? But what they do get a scapegoat out of this scenario, because white men can say, you can't blame me to the Black women because there are policies in place that are meant to attend to your needs. So it does not come back onto me. So white men essentially get the scapegoat out of having to deal with the problems that Black women may be facing that are unique to them, just because of the existence of other policies in the workplace. Okay, so this raises a very, very deep levels that we're starting to see the levels of how intersectionality can impact a unique person's discrimination, or it can make them be discriminated against because of who they are and the unique characteristics that they carry with them. So raising some challenges in the workplace. And before I move forward into, we did receive a lot of questions that do ask, well, how do we deal with this? And I'm going to give you some indicative ideas to think about. Of course, I can't answer your questions completely or give you solutions, because intersectionality is something that right now in policy, in theory, in knowledge, we are scrambling to try and find ways to think about this. So it's very live and in the moment and not fully or completely embedded for or accounted for. There are just action points that we need to take when we think of intersectionality. And it really does start with very basic baby steps. And the reason for this is because you yourself as an individual I'm assuming everyone who's looking at this talk has unique characteristics that belong to them entirely, that are not necessarily something that your workplace takes into account for you, but it also maybe does not stop you from being able to complete your job, or that you are being discriminated against, therefore not able to progress in your role. So this is where we get that slip where you can actually be disadvantaged because of your intersectional, your characteristics that are unique to you, or that you can find yourself being a person who is struggling to get the way you need to move forward in your leadership design, or to bring forward those actions in policies for your particular company. So what are some of the challenges? What is a snapshot right now of what's happening in workplaces? There is an EDI, the development of EDI, and many workplaces are going to have EDI policies. The incorporation of trying to get EDI to attend to wellness and well-being. Now, many people I meet go, I have EDI training fatigue, and maybe you're one of those people where you have to do these constant courses online and be informed and do constant training as part of your professional development, where we're talking about EDI, and you're like, maybe you do have a bit of EDI fatigue. I know a lot of Black minority staff who have to sit on hiring committees with HR, who also feel this fatigue that is disadvantageous to them, because you have to give extra of your time and your being because of who you are, those unique characteristics, in order to make it visible in the workplace. It requires you to attend and to give more of yourself, in itself creating an additional component of unfairness. But we need to think about these equality structures that we've championed for, that the benefits of equality that we enjoy now are actually the rights that people 50 years ago fought for us to have. The fights that we do now are actually to try and change things 50 years from now. So we do need to constantly step up. It's not going to be, I did the job today and the change is immediately transformative tomorrow. It is not going to look like that at all. The change every day that we do may happen for the future, 50 years from now. They may benefit from these acts, that the equality and the awareness that we are trying to champion for. And I think the real secret here is this word discomfort, making the likeliness of discomfort a constant state of being. Now, I'm not saying be uncomfortable where you work or live with uncomfortableness at all. I'm saying that these are difficult discussions to have, and you're not meant to feel good about talking about race at every point in the agenda. You're not meant to feel constantly that this is okay. Feeling discomfort and working through discomfort and knowing that it is discomfort is a pathway of awareness. So we do need to be open to this, because this is how we're going to learn and reflect and process ways forward for us to make other people comfortable to address what those intersectional gaps that they may be experiencing and not able to express. Again, it's long-term and ongoing. So looking at making EDI something within our organizations that promotes this wellness and well-being and is a safe space to have these discussions is a long-term thing. And you would find that you may have a couple champions within your institution now that really represent the heart and the core of advocating for these issues. When they leave, or if they move on to other roles or other jobs or responsibilities, then that gap is a gap again. And if that's happening in your company, then you need to attend to that. The representation and advocacy rights should not sit within the remit of one person. Then it means it's not been well indoctrinated into the culture of the institution. So that is another step that needs to be taken to think of how do we make this long-term and long-lasting. Well-being, managing employee engagement versus burnout. So we can talk a lot about social psychology of burnout, which are committed to the tasks that you have to achieve. But in terms of your rights and race relations, that exact point I was mentioning about having faces for your company that have to do, that are maybe from people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, that need to show that welcomeness to diversity. It's really important that if this is the agenda you're trying to achieve, these people are not doing it just off the back of their own time or additional work. There needs to be support structures in place to have a bit of a fairness of that representation. So that wellness and well-being, that entire package of the EDI needs to become 360 and evolve in a way that people can tell you if they're starting to feel like they are being utilized to champion rights or they're being underrepresented. So Leela Sri Nivezan, I think I got that right, is the CEO of Lever. So it's a recruitment company that looks for talent. And I thought that this quote was really quite catchy. And I'll give you a second to read that for yourself. So you need to have a platform of diversity. And the richer your staff network, the better you are with having people strive and people develop. That professional development is not just in the tasks that we do, but really solidly in the people that we work with as well. So if we don't open our eyes and our minds to inviting people with diverse skill sets from diverse backgrounds onto our team, we are eliminating our options of investigating what potential opportunities may have come from hearing those voices on the round table. Understanding company culture. I can't express this enough. So being mindful when companies wear brands like calling themselves meritocratic. When you hold up these certain words that represent your equality and the things that you champion for, it's really good that your company is doing this. Brilliant. But be mindful, because saying it may lead to the beggar scenario again, where your senior leadership isn't able to think that because it is part of the company brand, they don't need to attend to thinking of it as an issue anymore, or it doesn't need to be looked at closely or dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So be very wary of those branding words that make it easy for people to not have to care anymore, or it just deflects the need for other people to have to come back and look at what this means for discrimination. Collect data on your company. Know your institutional culture, your focus group, your surveys, exit interviews, appraisals. Many of you maybe already collect this data. It may be mandatory. Does the company use it to try, and what the good word would be, trial things? Do you use it to try and understand the culture of your organization? And how can you use it to create new avenues to explore how you can address intersectional issues, or within that as well, give opportunities to people to champion for new things within the organization. So in a way, embedding new leadership roles. And coming back to Crenshaw's statement that if you don't have a frame for something, you cannot fix a problem you can't see. And the way of being mindful of the branding that you have and being mindful of the data in and what your organization looks like is one way to open your eyes to problems that may be there that are overlooked. If you are attending to problems and you are listening to staff, and your organization is in turn listening to you, then those intersectional issues and those gaps, there may be ways to try and start attending to them without, you can't fix it immediately. You can't promise that it will resolve the problems in the long term, or if you were to hire someone else exactly from that background, that it would fix all of the issues. It needs to be ongoing. And I think that's what I'm trying to stress the most here, is the constant need to engage. Get involved in the wider industry conversations. So CIPD has recently published a really good document on how to talk about race at work. And part of my role as being the one of the directors for the Diversifying Leadership Program is getting people from professional services as well as academic staff to talk about race. Have that discussion. You work with people, maybe you do, and you may not necessarily have had those conversations with them about what are their thoughts on race. So there is guidance in the wider industry to help you navigate those conversations. And nearing to the end now is, I'll just wrap up by telling you a little bit about Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. Some of you may be aware of some of the intelligence debates that are going on that we're trying to use in very early years education to develop the mindset where if you have a fixed mindset, you are someone who, and this is all social psychology, someone who potentially believes that you know what you know, but are not really capable of going further. If you have a growth mindset, you are open to those changes and you are open to continuous learning. There are scales that, will help you understand which mindset you maybe more are aligned with. But it does raise the question, is awareness enough to inspire leadership change? And I'd say awareness is a good start, but knowing that something is a problem is one thing. Acting on how do you self-educate and open yourself to addressing that is another issue entirely. Unconscious bias, and I think of Bourdieu here, is unconscious bias is constant. You will react in ways to things that are new to you, that you've never reacted to before. How do you know you're not being biased? In your pathway to just try and understand and come to terms with it yourself, you may have unconscious bias that you're not even alerted to. Okay, that's the point of unconscious bias. But you need to keep doing those trainings and reflecting, even in your role. If you've been doing your job for 20 years, the importance of reflecting. Micro inequities often can pop up, and I think I addressed that when I spoke about the gap that intersectionality addresses, and the need to have conversations with people. And keeping open-mindedness, encourage your colleagues to keep learning and developing and doing those CPD, not just because they are lacking of knowledge. It's not about lacking, it's the ongoing nature of being constantly alerted and challenging yourself in different situations as the world changes, of how you would manage things and what really works for you. The diversity wheel, we come back to this because intersectionality, again, is quite complex. There is no simple one fixed solution. And when you take your rights within that inner wheel and then put that outer layer of education, workplace, political belief, these big sociological and societal factors in there, you are opening up, multiplying the gaps for intersectionality. And finally, on a very cliche statement, be the change, be that person who starts to investigate and think outside the box and ask questions in a safe way. Sometimes it's okay, if you don't know, to ask a colleague, is it okay for me to ask you this? I don't know. Is it okay? I'm not sure. How do you feel? And you may get a really honest response and engagement from them and learn something both of you new. And this will help be seen, and this will help address the gaps that you may or may not be aware of. All right, so I think I will stop there. It was a bit of a whistle tour, and take some questions.
Wow, thank you so much, Melissa. I knew it would be inspiring. I knew it would be full of information. And I know that I, for one, am going to re-look at what you've said and relearn from what you've been telling us. We have had a couple of questions through that are really interesting that you might like to address. So I'll go through a couple of them. This is from Stephen. Have you ever wondered if intersectionality hinges on oppression, or is it a spectrum of oppression? Oppressing, etc.?
So, good question. I think the intersectionality, because you may come from a background that pulls on different characteristics that are unique to you, some of those characteristics may have a history or a legacy of being from a narrative of oppression. So you would carry that title and that branding with you. Intersectionality is that gap where that oppression doesn't get recognized. So in a way, they feed into one another. You've got that gap, and even though we have rights and we have policies set up to try and alleviate and raise awareness against certain oppressions from our histories, they may not necessarily attend to your needs, given that you may have intersectional needs, if that makes sense. So in a way, there is a correlation there.
Great, thank you. We've got a pre-submitted question from Bill. How does sense of place affect intersectionality in the workplace?
So sense of place can mean, it can literally mean where you come from, as being, you're the only, I've had that experience, the only Caribbean person in an Australian university. A sense of place would mean that absolutely your culture may not be accounted for at all in the workplace. Yes, if you go with that geographical meaning, you may have to be the trumpet that blows the difference in your workplace so that you can bring that flavor. And not everyone is attuned to maybe putting their hand up and volunteering or sharing. But I would say that definitely a sense of place in a geography way, or even from your particular characteristics, your race or your sense of place in the role you play in the organization. If you're not someone to try and raise it, you can definitely work with your advisory groups or your staff networks to highlight your unique sense of place, and how it can maybe be assimilated into some components of the work that you already do or that the company is already advocating for.
Great, thank you. And we have another pre-submitted one from James. Do you think that gay men suffer from gender pay gap or lower pay for same job issues in the workplace due to stereotyped femininity and the disadvantages that come with this?
So that is a really excellent question. And I think that borders into even, I think we have familiar concepts of intersectionality, and that just ups the game in terms of being gay and, not really being attended to being gay versus the feminine components that you may have that are attended to in the workplace. So a brand new intersectional zone there. And can you read the second part with the question about the intersectional question there, Joe?
Yep. Here, from James. Sorry. I'm sorry, I have lost it. Here we are. Sorry. Do you think gay men suffer from gender pay gap, lower pay for the same job issues in the workplace due to stereotyped femininity and the disadvantages that come with this?
So the pay gap, and that is an interesting point. That's what I was missing there. The way in which companies do advocate for equality of pay, I mean, you're crossing equalities here now. You're looking for origin, you're looking for the obligation, you're crossing across different forms of what you want out of the equality, and that's not a bad thing, but definitely I do think that there will be some marginalization happening, especially if you are a smaller group. So that would be something that you'd have to try and again speak about with your line manager or your support networks to red flag.
Great, thank you. And we've got this really interesting latest question that's come through from H. Robin. Intersectionality is not recognised as a legal phenomena. And if there's a court case, the claims are made under individual parts of the equalities law. Is this likely to change?
So, wonderful question. I don't think I am the legal person to really say if it's likely to change or not. So the tricky part about it is when we have those acts that look at different forms of our rights and the protected characteristics that I showed in the presentation, it's very difficult to multiply out the intersectional issues that can arise from it. Can we make intersectionality as a term itself or a concept illegal? We can maybe create a legal space for it to be a space that we commit to our advances in trying to widen our awareness or trying to create safe spaces for people to have conversations, but we may not be able to actually enforce it. And the research is ongoing. I could be wrong about the extent to which we can. The research is ongoing, and the policies, we are looking at a range of policies in workplaces to look at, can intersectionality be addressed, and is there any patterns of how they may be addressed across different organizations and different companies? Then we might be able to build a case for making it something that is more fixed.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very, very much, Melissa. That was a really enlightening, interesting presentation. So thank you for that. I particularly was interested in, well, lots of things, but the Monopoly game was very innovative and very useful to use a poll in order to find out how much our audience actually knew about intersectionality and how much it affects them. So a big, big thank you from myself and, of course, from CMI and all the delegates who attended today. So thank you very much, Melissa.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'll pass over to Mel now.
Perfect. Thank you, Jo. Unfortunately, that is it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, as Jo's mentioned, and thank you, Jo, for hosting and Melissa for your insights and expertise. Don't forget, if you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, where you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. If you're not yet a CMI member or subscriber, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. Please also do take a few moments to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing the evaluation form. The link is also in the live chat. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.